All right, I'm going to attempt to explain the musical alphabet and how to find notes on the guitar or the bass using the musical alphabet. So, if you're a student of mine, you probably have access to this. I've got the musical alphabet drawn out in two ways here. I've drawn it out as a line up here, and I've drawn it out as a circle up here because once we get around the octave, we just start over, right? So, the musical alphabet, I'm going to grab a guitar, is just a way of organizing the 12 notes that we use in the Western musical system. So, on your instrument, guitar or bass, you start on any fret. I'm at the 5th fret of the low E string. That note happens to be an A, but that doesn't matter right now. If I go 1 fret up, I've gone up a half step. I'm going to keep going up by half steps. If I go 1 fret down, I've gone down a half step. And a half step is the smallest interval or distance you can move pitch-wise in Western music. Okay, now there's an infinite number of pitches in between this note and this note. If we bend the string, there's all those possibilities, but we're not dealing with those in between sounds right now. Now, if you go up 2 frets, that's called a whole step. And if you go down 2 frets, you're going down a whole step. So, in order to understand the musical alphabet, you have to understand the concept of half steps and whole steps. A whole step is literally 2 half steps. If you hear somebody say a step, like go up a step or go down a step, they might mean a half step and they might mean a whole step. So, there's plenty of times where they might assume that you know whether they mean you should go up a half step or a whole step. If you don't, just ask. If somebody says go up a step, you could say half step or whole step, and hopefully they'll tell you. Or if they're your teacher and they want you to be able to figure it out by listening, they might say listen and figure it out, and that's okay too, because now you know it's either a half step or a whole step. So, you just try on your own, figure it out. That's how you learn. So sometimes when I'm teaching, I don't want to answer my students' question. I want to make them figure it out. All right. The notes of the musical alphabet, usually to get from one note to the next, you're going up a whole step. So if I'm on an A and I want to go to B, I'm going to go up a whole step. The only time it's a half step to get to another natural note, which is a note that doesn't have a sharp or a flat in front of it, is between B and C, and over here between E and F. Okay? Now, if you understand this idea, and you want to memorize this, okay? This isn't something you want to have to look at. You want to just tell yourself, it's a half step from B to C, it's a half step from E to F, it's a whole step everywhere else. And if you're on G, going up to A, you're going to go up a whole step to get back to A, back around to the next octave. And if you're going down, it's a whole step from A down to G, whole step from G down to F, a half step from F down to E, and so on. That's why this circle version is so useful. So if you don't have this, you might want to copy this down. You can pause the video, take a look at it, write it down yourself. That's useful because it'll help you to remember. Okay. If you know the names of the strings of your instrument and you know about the musical alphabet, you can find every note on every string of the guitar or the bass. So, for example, the low string on the guitar, that's the E string, low E. It's a half step from open E, which is fret 0, to F, so that's the first fret. It's a whole step from F to G. It's a whole step from G to A, so that's an A. Okay? And from A to B is a whole step. B to C is a half step. C to D is a whole step. And from D, if you go up another whole step, you're back at E. You're at the 12th fret, which on my guitar and your bass and almost every other instrument in the world, it's going to have a double dot there. Okay, at the 12th fret, there's a double dot. And on the top of the instrument, if you've got fret markers, I don't know if you can see it because of the lighting, but there it is. There's a double dot there. Okay? That's your octave. That means you've gone up every half step. Now we have 12 half steps in the octave. So the 12th fret will be the octave on every string. So if I do the A string, open A, it's a whole step from A to B, so B is on the 2nd fret. It's a half step from B to C, C is on the 3rd fret. It's a whole step from C to D. It's a whole step from D to E. It's a half step from E to F. It's a whole step from F to G. And from G up another whole step, you're back at A up the octave. So, exercise for you is simple. Find all the natural notes on the strings. If you want to get really good at finding notes, pick a letter and find it on every string. So I'm going to find a G on every string. So low E string, E, F, G. There's a G. A string, the long way, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. There's my G. The short way, I remember that the 12th fret of the A string is also an A, and it's a whole step down from A to G. Okay, so there's my G. The D string, D, E, F, G, right? The G string, that's easy. Open G is G, or the 12th fret, G. Okay, the string's called G because when you play it open, it's the note G. No brainer, as they used to say, right? So then open B, C, D, E, F, G. The long way, or the short way, I remember that the 12th fret of the B string is also a B, down a whole step to A, down a whole step to G. And the high E string, E, F, G. Right? Okay. The low and high E string, the 3rd fret is a G for both strings. It's just the G's are 2 octaves apart. Okay, so I just found a G on every string. Now you might ask yourself, what are these notes in between? Like, what is this note that's a half step higher than A and a half step lower than B? Or the note that's a half step higher than C and a half step lower than D? Well, those notes have multiple names. Okay, so if you're a half step higher than A, that note is called A sharp. That's the name of that note. If you're a half step lower than B, which is the same note, it's called B flat. So there's 2 ways to name that note. And you want to be conversant with both ways of naming the note. Okay, if you're hanging out with a bunch of people who are playing pop or rock music or bluegrass or folk or country music, where things tend to be in keys like E and A and D, then people are going to use sharps. If you're playing a lot of jazz, playing a lot of blues, also pop as well. Pop can be, everything can be played in any key, but if you're playing a lot of jazz, things tend to be in flat keys. So, as a guitar player, you need to be able to say, this note is an A, this note here is a B flat or an A sharp. Okay? Don't be one of those people who's like, oh, I only think in sharps. No, that's not cool. Think in sharps, think in flats. Be able to communicate with all the musicians that you play with and to be able to have them communicate with you. If somebody says that's a B flat, your brain should be like, B flat, I know where that is on my guitar. There's a B flat, I found it. Okay? No problem, no sweat. B flat, B flat, B flat, B flat. Okay? it's well worth the effort to find your way around the instrument with ease, because then you're not nervous when people are putting you on the spot, which is like what people do all the time. All right, so that's it. If you have a question about the musical alphabet, send me an email. It's anistmusic@gmail.com. That's the easiest way to get in touch with me. And I love to talk about music, so I'll answer your question because that's kind of like what I like to do. All right. Have a good day. Bye.